Hello. It's almost Thanksgiving. Can you believe it? Thanksgiving is the worst American holiday, maybe. I feel like, yeah, right? Who cares? Genuinely. Usually it's where you start to see a lot of division among family members. Women tend to spend all day cooking. Men watch football. Gender wars. Who needs it? Politics. People arguing. Not in my family. Y'all stay safe. We all vote blue. Gonna cut that out. Thanksgiving this year is gonna suck for a lot of you guys out there in America, because what a time we're in. Dear Lord, what a time we are in. I mean, it's crazy. And if you even slightly differ on political opinions with your family members, certainly one of you is going to get excommunicated. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be your weird cousin? Guess we'll have to find out. So, yeah, Thanksgiving's never been one of my favorite holidays, but it does get me in the mood for something very specific, and that is books that center around family conflict. So if you're anxious about the upcoming holidays and you're nervous about seeing your family, seeing your sister's husband, seeing your mom, seeing your dog, maybe you'll find some consolation in these books I'm about to talk about, because I guarantee these families are more fucked up than yours. I compiled a list of 10 books that I want to recommend to people that revolve around family conflict. I tried to stay away from like the most obvious ones. I do mention some of them, but it's hard not to. But I wanted to find books that weren't always listed when it comes to like family conflict novels. It's always fun to read books like this around the holidays. It really is. This is like one of my favorite kinds of books. Like, I love a book that centers around like a multi-generational family story about choices and communication and things like that. If it's taking us through the decades of history and we're unpacking some sort of like larger cultural trauma at the same time, oh my god, that is my bread and butter. So I have compiled a list of 10. It was very hard to narrow this down, but I chose 10 books that I would genuinely recommend that are not the most obvious examples. So let's get into it. So my first book is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is a very, very famous novel. You've probably heard of it. It generated some buzz online among Gen Z people during the pandemic because Emma Chamberlain read it and did a reading vlog of her reading it. And I love that video. Like, when I'm in a reading slump, I honestly rewatch that video and it makes me excited to read again. And I remember people after that video being like, what is this book? John who? And then discovering East of Eden. Thankfully, I'd already read it, so I had my little moment of superiority. I bought this in high school because James Dean is on the cover. And I don't know if you've noticed in my videos before, in the background of my videos, there's a James Dean poster on my wall. There's actually 2 in my bedroom. I put those up when I was like 14 or 15. That tells you a lot about what I was like in high school. Anyway, I bought this because James Dean was on the cover, because famously James Dean is in the film adaptation of East of Eden, and that film adapts the second half of the book. It's a decent film. I think it's Elia Kazan directed it. The book is phenomenal. This book is so good. I read it 5 years ago now. I think about it constantly, and anytime anyone brings it up, I can't stop myself from gushing. If you don't know, it is about a family in the Salinas Valley in Northern California, and it's sort of 2 generations. So the first part of the book is about the father and his coming of age with his brother and meeting a woman named Kathy. And then the second part of the book is about that man's 2 sons, and it's sort of a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel. That's how it's presented, as like a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel from the Bible. But I would say don't let that deter you. It's not an overtly religious book by any means. It's actually pretty not religious. And you don't need any like biblical knowledge or anything. You're so fine to read this if you don't know anything about that, and it's not like very like lofty pretentious novel. John Steinbeck is very much a man of the people, salt of the earth. It's a book about farmers. It's a book about family. It's a book about where you grow up and how you're connected to it and the people you grew up with. And it's a book about how we fail our children in the same ways that we were failed. It's great. It makes me cry. The movie made me cry. The book made me cry. It was great. I don't really cry often. I've started crying more in recent years as the unbearable weight of life just bears down on my chest. But usually I don't cry at like stories. And this was one of the first books that I ever really started sobbing to. It is long, which deters people, but it moves quickly. It has one of the best female villains ever written. One thing I'll say is people, when they recommend this book online, tend to be like, you just need to get past the first few pages when he's describing the landscape, and then the story really kicks in and it's amazing. I disagree with that take. The descriptions of the landscape are some of the best parts of Steinbeck's writing. If you've read his other works, like Grapes of Wrath, for example, talks a lot about Oklahoma and California and the landscape, because the land is so central to the story in that book. It's also central to the story in this book because it's about farmers. The way that John Steinbeck describes the nature of California is so breathtaking that to say that you need to just get through it to get to the story is entirely missing the point of his writing and is like offensive to me. I remember when I went to California after reading Steinbeck and being on the side of a mountain, like driving to a hiking trail and thinking about the descriptions in this book of the landscape and just being so overwhelmed because he just got it. Like, if the American West, I could wax poetic about the American West for ages. Anyway, this is an excellent novel about intergenerational trauma, conflict, the two brothers being pitted against each other in a really unfair way. It's also about religious trauma. Not really. It's also about religion. It's about gender. It's about the choices we make and how they affect everyone around us. It's about the American West. It's about the American dream. It's fantastic. Give it a read. That's number 1 on my list. One of the only classics I put on this list intentionally. Next one is The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Photo will be inserted here or wherever. I don't have a physical copy because I borrowed my copy, but it is in my top 5 favorite books of all time, so it's kind of insane I don't have a physical copy. I have actually listened to the audiobook of this novel as well, and it's narrated by Tom Hanks. He does an amazing job with it. You should absolutely read the book, listen to the audiobook, whatever mode you want to go by. The Dutch House is in my top 5, as I said, and I saw someone else on the internet say that the Dutch House is like their litmus test for people. Like, if someone doesn't like this book, then they're like probably a terrible person. It's really good. It's about a brother and sister growing up in Pennsylvania in the 1960s. Their stepmother, their mother, their father, all are adults that fail them in many ways, and the sister ends up becoming like a parentified eldest daughter, classic, you know the deal. And it's narrated from the point of view of her younger brother, but she is like really the main character. He's the protagonist, but she's the like main character. And Maeve, she's a phenomenal character. The book is really beautiful. It is sort of cozy, even though it's like very sad, but Anne Patchett has an ability to write sad things in a way that still makes you feel like you're being comforted and being hugged, which is great. I really loved this book. I cannot recommend it enough, and there's a great sibling relationship, brother-sister relationship. I have a brother that I'm close with, and I never see good brother-sister relationships in media, so I love when I find one, and The Dutch House is an amazing brother-sister dynamic. So that's my next recommendation. So next is a new release that I've talked about on this channel before, and it is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I talked about this book before I even read it. I have since read it. I gave it 5 stars. Sally Rooney hasn't ever written anything that I have not given 5 stars. That was a terrible sentence, but I love Sally Rooney's writing. I have said before, I think she's probably one of the most important writers of the 21st century. And someone else who I think is an important 21st century novelist is also on this list, so we'll get to that. This book is about 2 brothers, Ivan and Peter. It's probably Ivan because their dad is Polish. It's about their relationship and how both of them are dealing with the death of their father together and separately, and about the romantic relationships that they are both in. But the best moments of the book are really between them and like the confrontations they have and the ways that they talk about each other to other people, and you can see where the miscommunications are. Like, the miscommunication in this book is very well done. It's frustrating, but it's very realistic, so it's like there's a lot of empathy on both sides. I really like how Ivan especially is a character that, like, if it were presented to me from Peter's perspective, I probably would have hated Ivan, not wanted to deal with him, and probably vice versa, but probably I don't know, probably vice versa, but like reading Ivan's chapters and then seeing how Peter sees him, or like what Peter remembers of him because they haven't like lived in the same house in years, made me be like, wow, I would probably hate Ivan if I only knew him from Peter's perspective. So it was just so well done. And yeah, I really thought it was interesting that it's about 2 brothers that haven't lived together in a long time, that were close when they were younger and now have sort of drifted apart. I have a pretty significant age gap with my brother. He's 6 years older. And I remember that being like kind of weird when he like would come home from college or like whatever he was doing, and I would be like more of a person. I'd be like 14, 15, and he'd be like, where's the 10-year-old, you know? So that was interesting, and I thought that was really cool to read about. This was an excellent book, a great step in Sally Rooney's career. I, again, gave it 5 stars. I don't think there's very few books on this list that I didn't give a full 5 stars. Maybe I gave like a 4.5 or a 4. But these are all great reads. But yeah, if you were on the fence because you didn't want to just like give into the hype is deserved. Something that I saw that was super annoying online was people saying that they couldn't understand Peter's POV because it's written in sort of a stream of consciousness style, but it actually kind of isn't. Like, if you've ever read stream of consciousness writing, like Virginia Woolf, for example, or James Joyce. I haven't read James Joyce, but I have read Virginia Woolf, so we'll go with that example. That sort of like modernist stream of consciousness style, it can be very dense and very difficult. This is clearly Sally Rooney paying homage to stream of consciousness, but I would say it's a bit clearer and less muddy. And I saw people online, and I swear I have like screenshots. If I do, I'll insert them. I saw people online being like, I can understand a damn thing from his chapters. I only liked Ivan's chapters. It's like, girl, come on. We need to expand our literary tastes. The place that Sally Rooney occupies in the modern literary discussion is like not quite where she fits, and so a lot of people who don't read much lit fic ended up finding Sally Rooney because of like the Normal People miniseries, and they just like don't want to do the work to actually like understand. Am I sounding super pretentious and annoying? Yeah. That's what this channel is. Like, if I have to be apologetic on my own YouTube channel about my pretentious book opinions and like elitist, I don't want to say elitist because anyone with a library card can read books. Like, that's the thing. I feel like I can be pretentious about books because I read them, I've done the work, but also because this isn't about access. Like, yes, there are people who were not raised in households that like encouraged a love of reading, but every school has a library. Somewhere in that library is a copy of Anne of Green Gables. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many easy ways to get into reading. I'm gonna call this, aren't I? I'm not really trying to start discourse right now. The point is, I am not gonna apologize for having like a low opinion of certain kinds of books or certain kinds of readers, because this is my channel and I'm gonna say what I want to say, and I don't think what I'm saying is wrong, obviously, because it's my opinion. And also, like, there's such an easy fix to this. Like, if you aren't reading enough or you aren't reading good books or expansively, library cards are free. Used bookstores, you can find books for like $2. You can find an illegal PDF. Like, it doesn't matter. There's no excuse for being a bad reader. Like, if you pick up a book like Intermezzo and you just get frustrated by Peter's chapters and like won't try and figure them out, and I just like I just find it exhausting, quite frankly. Anyway, Intermezzo. The next book I have is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I have it shelved with my like thriller and like horror novels, I guess, because she wrote Gone Girl, which is like a thriller. But Sharp Objects kind of has a different vibe. There was a TV series with Amy Adams, and there's some very famous GIFs, I say GIF, from that TV series. So you probably know this story even if you haven't read the book or watched the show. Sharp Objects is about a female journalist named Camille who goes back to her small town in Missouri to investigate a series of murders of like young girls, and she has to confront her own history in that town and like the horrible things that happened to her there, and also her relationship with her mother, which is very tense. And that is why I picked it for this list. This book revolves around a really, really horrible mother-daughter relationship, and there's a second daughter involved, a half-sister who's much younger than Camille, and that adds a lot to the dynamic. So those three characters, the way that they play off of each other, so well done, so fascinating. This book is really dark, like really dark, so like lots of trigger warnings. It depressed the hell out of me, but it was a great story, so I really recommend it. I haven't read Gone Girl. I have seen the movie. From what I get from the movie, like this is kind of a different vibe. Like that is more of a like straight up thriller, and this one is a bit more literary, but it's thrilling to read, I'll give you that much. Like, made my stomach churn. Okay, next is a memoir. This memoir is also about mother-daughter relationships. This is Wild Game by Adrienne Brodeur. This is a memoir about a young woman who becomes heavily involved in keeping her mother's affair a secret from her father. The mother starts having an affair with a close family friend from like the first page of the book, and she like gets her daughter involved in like devising plans and like keeping secrets basically. And the entire rest of the book is the daughter like keeping that secret, and also how it like entangles her to her mother to like devastating results, and how she kind of like processes all of this. Without sounding too flippant, it really does read like a plot line of Gossip Girl. It's about like very wealthy New Englanders, like people whose families came over on the Mayflower, having affairs with each other, and the daughter and the mom have this weird relationship that is just like, it's very Gossip Girl, but obviously because it's real people and like this is her real life, the emotional stakes are a lot higher. The trauma doesn't feel so overt. Like there are literal like memoirs. I mean, there are memoirs where people go through like seriously harrowing circumstances, and at first glance you'd think, okay, all you did was keep a secret for your mom. But the way that she starts to like unpack the effects and the repercussions of that secret and like what her mother did by cluing her in that way and like bringing her into an adult situation, and the way it affects her as an adult, it's like, wow, like these I guess it's not a small thing, but it just like, it doesn't feel like as crazy as what some parents do to their kids. Like if you read like I'm Glad My Mom Died, the Jeanette McCurdy memoir, I would say these two are like similar in that they're both dealing with like a very intense mother-daughter relationship, but I feel like Jeanette McCurdy's mom is so overtly abusive, and what's happening here is a lot more subtle. And I think it was interesting to read about like how that is still incredibly profound and like impactful. I flew through this. Like I wouldn't say the writing style is very good. It's just very simple writing. The story is just like so crazy. Like just when shit can't get any crazier, it gets crazier. Like shit escalates to insane heights in this book. It's wild. It's bananas. I read it in like 2 days. Like I couldn't put it down. So fraught mother-daughter relationship there. And the next book is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, photo inserted somewhere. Again, I read a borrowed copy. This book is a really cool multi-generational story. There are two sisters who diverge at one point in the narrative, and it follows like the two lines of that family as they just navigate the world, and it's centered around colorism in the Black community. The sisters are from this like town in the South that is sort of this like heightened colorist world. Like obviously colorism is very real and a very big issue, but in this town it's made like very tangible, like part of like life in this town, and everyone in that town spends every generation trying to get lighter skinned, and like everyone in the town is Black, but also everyone in the town is incredibly light skinned, so it's like this light skinned community. There's 2 sisters. It also talks about their mother, and then it talks about their daughters as well, and it goes through like the 3 generations, and how choices that you make before you even think about having kids will end up affecting those kids anyway. It was really good. It was another one of those books where like very readable. It was like pretty popular when it came out, and it's just one of those books that's like lit fic but isn't that dense. So yeah, the divided sisters, like following each of their descendants, and how different choices they made have different positive and negative effects on their kids. It's set in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and there's also like trans characters, and so I thought that was really interesting, reading about like trans characters in the 1970s. Okay, next we're going to do another memoir. This is the second memoir I put on the list. This is my favorite memoir I think I've ever read, maybe. The Invention of Solitude by Paul Auster. I talked about a Paul Auster book in a previous video, famously went on a nasty ass rant about how terrible that goddamn book was. This is the first book he ever wrote, and it's his memoir. The other book I read was fiction. To hear me rant about that other book, you would think I would never want to recommend a Paul Auster book ever, much less say that one of his books is like one of my favorite books, but genuinely is a masterpiece. It is a memoir about his father, and how when his father died and he had to start going through like all of his effects and, you know, his house and everything and packing everything up, he like started to learn about this man that he, even though he was his dad, he'd like never had a relationship with, and who was like a complete mystery to him and to like everyone in their lives. And then the second part of the memoir is about him being a writer, and also about him being a father, and like what he wants to leave for his children, and what kind of dad he wants to be. But yeah, it's fantastic. It's quite slim, like I think it's like 200 pages, so it gets kind of dense in that second half, but present yourself with a challenge. What's the worst that can happen, you know? I love this book. I don't have even much to say about it. Like it's not very plot or story heavy. It's kind of the opposite of Wild Game, where Wild Game is like really all about plot and vibes, and this one is all about like language and ideas and philosophy. So I guess you could choose whichever one is more up your alley, or if you're like me, they're both up your alley, so read both. Why not? Okay, I chose 2 books by Zadie Smith because I couldn't choose which one I wanted to talk about more. I think the one that I liked more personally is On Beauty. This was her 3rd novel. This is a retelling of Howard's End by E.M. Forster, which is a turn of the century novel. That's also excellent. I recommend. I liked On Beauty even better. I was talking about Sally Rooney as like one of the most important authors of the 21st century. I would say Zadie Smith is another one of the most important authors of the 21st century. Her writing is phenomenal. Her nonfiction is fantastic. Her fiction is fantastic. On Beauty and White Teeth were both named in the New York Times 100 best books of the century so far, and I fully agree with both of them. I would say On Beauty should be in like the top 10, to be quite honest. If it wasn't. On Beauty is about a family in a small college town in Massachusetts. The dad is a professor at this like prestigious liberal arts college in the town, and he has an academic rival who lives in England, but who takes a temporary position at the liberal arts college, and so they're sort of battling it out over the course of the novel, but their families become very intertwined in different ways, and so it's about like that conflict. It's also about like racial conflict. The dad, Howard, he's the like protagonist of the novel. He's white, but his wife is Black, so his kids are mixed race. And then the rival professor is Black and Caribbean, and his family is all Black, but they are also incredibly conservative. So whereas Howard's politics are a lot more liberal, so it's very interesting sort of unpacking of like identity politics and how things are like shifting towards these like identity-based like reactionary ideas. And this was written in like the mid 2000s. It really does sort of like foreshadow where the like political conversation and entwined with the racial conversation would go in this country in the coming years. The writing in this book is so phenomenal. You get multiple POVs from all of the characters, every character in the main family and members of the other family, and also a like third party person who gets entwined in all of this. If you know the plot of Howard's End, then you know the plot of On Beauty. The like characters are just so well developed. Their relationships with each other feel very real. The center of the story is Kiki and Howard's marriage, and those scenes are the ones that stand out clearest to me in my memory of between the two of them, and it's amazing. I've never been married for longer than 30 years, but I felt like I was in that marriage, and my heart was breaking when they were fighting, because obviously this is a book about family conflict, so I feel like it's not a spoiler to say that there's a lot of fighting. This book is excellent. I really, really highly recommend it. It's not what you think it is. Whatever you think it is, it's more than that. So then I want to talk about, just mention briefly, her first novel, which is White Teeth. And this is set in London, and I just wanted to bring it up because it's also about family conflict, but it's told in that multi-generational style that I really love. So it starts with the like parents in the 1970s, and then it goes to like their children in the 90s, and it's about like London and how much it changes during that time, becomes like a very increasingly diverse city with increasingly diverse issues to go along with that. And it was written in 1999, and it's like, again, it's very much on the pulse of the time because it's so insightful. Also sort of predicts the future of like gentrification, diversity, immigration, these like narratives. Like Zadie Smith herself is a mixed race woman, and I think that as a concept like was very fresh at the time, and now I think it's a bit more accepted, of this idea of like mixed race people like existing, and like their specific relationship to the diaspora. And I think like all these studies have come out that are like, by 2050 most of America will be mixed race, and there was all this like uproar about those statistics coming out. And so Zadie Smith is like sort of the forefront of that conversation, which I think is really interesting. But her books are about so much more than identity politics, like, and she doesn't want to be pigeonholed as like the woman who's writing about mixed race women. Like, she has a lot to say, and I don't think it's fair to like completely pigeonhole her in that way. These books are both wonderful. On Beauty is my personal favorite of the two, but White Teeth was also phenomenal. My next one is also a multi-generational story. This one is Middlesex by Jeffery Eugenides. Middlesex talks about 3 generations of a Greek-American family living in Detroit, and it is as much a novel about the immigrant experience in this country and about Detroit and like Detroit's local history as it is about the family. The narrator of the novel is Calliope, who is a intersex person, and it's about their life, their parents and their grandparents. Their grandparents come over from Greece to Detroit, and then their parents, which is like the middle section of the book and is like the weakest part of the book, if there is a weakest part, like this book is phenomenal. And obviously being born intersex is a genetic thing, and so it like the idea is like they're tracing this genetic work that gets passed down. It's weird. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens, and that starts happening like right from the jump, so that's not even me being like it gets weird. It starts weird and it stays weird. It's really moving. There's so much about family in here, and about like the secrets that we keep from our children and from our partners and from ourselves, and like what it means to like immigrate to a new country and raise kids that you can't even recognize because they're just like living such a different experience than you lived. It's also about Detroit, and I learned so much about Detroit history. Like, there's actual facets of Detroit history and like American history that get woven into the story, and I feel like I learned so much about that city. He wrote The Virgin Suicides, which is, I guess, more famous, but this is like the more awarded book. It's pretty long, but it moves very quickly. Like, it's not dense at all. Like, you will just get so drawn into these people. I think one of the most fascinating parts of the book for me was, we start off with the grandparents, and the grandmother as a character is presented in such a, like, as like a strong female like character, and she's a young woman and she's beautiful and she's kicking ass and whatever and saving her family. And then by the time we get to her as like a grandmother in Calliope's life, she's just like this ridiculous old lady who's so stuck in the ways of the old world and like can't be taken seriously. And watching that change in like her role in the family was so interesting to me. Obviously I'm young, and I feel like when I think about like my grandmother and the way that I see her versus like when she was my age and she wasn't a grandma, like she was just another young lady, like so interesting. That felt like nonsense. Anyway, yeah, Middlesex. But the last book on my list is the oldest book here. All of these books were published in the 20th century or 21st century. This book was published at the turn of the century. It is What Maisie Knew by Henry James. I took an entire course on Henry James in college, and I hated every second of it for multiple reasons. But one of the only parts I really enjoyed was reading this book. This book moves very quickly, which if you know Henry James, you know that that's like saying something. His writing is so dense, and I really don't like it, most of it. But this is one of his later works. It's about a small girl who gets caught up in a divorce, a very, very nasty divorce between her wealthy parents and the various people who get brought into her life and in just various ways disappoint her. It's honestly very sad because like no one in this book really cares about her. The whole thing is told from this sort of like close third person, so not exactly her point of view, but it is sort of from the eyes of a child who doesn't really know the full situation of like what's going on. But obviously we, the reader, can piece it together, and it's like very sad how this girl is just like neglected and used as a bargaining chip. It's a really good book. If you want to check out Henry James and you're not sure you can commit to like Portrait of a Lady or Washington Square or whatever, do What Maisie Knew. It's not his most famous work, but it's one that I feel like I was profoundly impacted by. And in terms of like family conflict and family strife, you got a winner with this one. It is sort of funny but also sad. It's like there's like a dark comedy to it, but I wouldn't. Yeah, let's just get into my honorable mentions. So if you turn on this video and you expected me to talk about Anna Karenina from the jump, there's a reason why I didn't do that, but I did pull Anna Karenina. We can talk about it now. Obviously, most people know that the first sentence of Anna Karenina, let's see if I can have it memorized. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That is like one of the most famous first lines of a novel ever written. So you would think that I would want to talk about Anna Karenina for this video. I love Anna Karenina. It is an amazing, amazing book, and I have many video ideas in the future where I will be recommending this book to you, the viewer. Today, I am not recommending it because it's not really that much about family conflict. There is family conflict involved, especially in one aspect of the plot with Anna's brother and his wife. And I guess Levin and his brother have kind of a situation going on. I think Anna Karenina is too unwieldy, not in a bad way, just it's a sprawling story that covers a lot of ground. So I feel like to classify it as a story about family conflict is like not correct. And I could already think of 10 books that are very specifically about family conflict. And this one I feel like is about so much more than just family conflict. So if you need a reason to read it, here's your reason, like please go read it. But I would just rather save it for like a different video, to be honest. The other book that I really wanted to include on this list but ultimately didn't was 100 Years of Solitude. This is another one of my top 5 favorite books of all time, along with The Dutch House, and it is a multi-generational family story about just different generations of the Buendia family. I didn't include it because it's just so famous, like it was such an obvious choice, and I wanted to highlight books that were maybe not as obvious of a choice. I decided that like I'm probably going to talk about this book a million times while making YouTube videos, and I just didn't need to include it on this list. But again, if this is, you needed like a call to action to read this book, this is your call to action. This is such a phenomenal book. Like oh my god, it's so fucking good. It's actually, I'm due to reread it because I haven't read it in like 6 years or something. I read it when I was a junior in high school, and it just like changed the way I read. So good. So good. And it is about family conflict. On a larger scale, it's about colonization and the colonial legacy, but you know, why not both? So anyway, yeah, that was that one. And then I had 2 more that I just wanted to give an honorable mention to. These 2 books are like very much exactly what you think of when you think family conflict. I would classify them both as like Trouble in the Suburbs books. And I just didn't put them on the main list because neither of them were like my absolute favorites. Like I gave them both like 4 stars, 3.5 stars, or whatever, and I just like didn't feel the need to put them on the main list, but I'll give them a quick shout out. They are Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng and Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. Both of them follow very similar plots. They are about suburban, regular, all-American families with like a darkness in them, and how the actions of certain members of the family in both books, it's specifically the mothers that are sort of catalysts for fallout, how those choices and behaviors that the mothers make end up affecting the rest of the family members. Not everything is not as it seems in the suburbs. Like things are in trouble, and they're super great reads. Like I enjoyed reading both of them, but they just like aren't that special to me, to be honest. But I just wanted to shout them out. Like they're both good options. If nothing else on my list was Wetting Your Whistle. So that is my video for today. I hope this was interesting. Like, I don't know, I thought it would be fun. Happy holidays. I hope your Thanksgiving is way more peaceful than these books are, and that your family is less conflicted than these families are. But if it's not, I'm your friend. You know what I mean? The holidays can be tough. It's always nice to curl up with a good book and ignore your uncles screaming about the election. That's all I have to say. Bye.